A group of little white kittens keeps following an old German shepherd again and again, day after day. At first, it seems strange. Sweet, maybe. But then, it gets eerie. The kittens aren't lost. They're leading her somewhere. And when she finally follows them deep into the woods, what she discovers hidden beneath the broken floorboards is something no one, human or animal, could ever be ready for. She thought her days of saving lives were over. She was wrong. There's something buried out there, something dark. And when the truth hits her, it breaks her in a way that even war zones never could. Why did the kittens choose her? What secret were they trying to show the world? And when the tears finally fall, is it from heartbreak or from hope? Would you be strong enough to follow them? Your comments and presence here remind me why I tell these stories. If you still believe in the healing strength of love, truth, and quiet courage, then you're the reason this channel exists. The morning sky hung heavy over rural Kentucky, dark clouds rolling in like waves of gray wool. Thunder rumbled in the distance as Marla, the aging German shepherd, made her way across the worn wooden floor of the old barn. Her paws, once swift and sure during countless rescue missions, now moved with the measured pace of retirement. Through the barn's open door, something caught her eye. Two small white shapes huddled near the entrance, their tiny forms almost glowing against the storm-darkened ground. Kittens. They were so still, so unusually quiet, that at first Marla thought they might be bits of paper blown in by the wind. Her nose twitched, taking in their scent. They were real enough, young, hungry, and carrying the musty smell of somewhere damp and closed off. The kittens didn't run when she approached, which struck her as odd. Most cats scattered at the sight of her large frame. Martha and George, her elderly owners, noticed them too during their morning check of the property. "Well, would you look at that?" Martha said, her wrinkled face creasing with curiosity. "Never seen kittens quite like those before." George adjusted his worn baseball cap and shrugged. "Probably strays from one of the farms down the road. Strange little things, but they're not causing any trouble." But Marla knew better. Something about these kittens pulled at her deep inside, stirring memories she'd rather forget. Their presence brought back echoes of her last mission. The flood, the rushing water, the desperate search for that little boy. The failure that had ended her career and left a wound in her heart that never quite healed. The next morning the storm had passed, but Marla's unease only grew stronger. More white kittens had appeared, their fur streaked with mud, their tiny bellies clearly empty. They sat in a perfect line at the barn's entrance, their eyes fixed on Marla with an intensity that made her fur stand on end. These weren't ordinary strays. Their behavior was too coordinated, too purposeful. As Marla watched them from her spot in the barn, one of the kittens stepped forward, its blue eyes locked with hers. In that moment, something passed between them, a message, a plea, a call for help that bypassed words and went straight to her heart. The feeling hit her like a physical force, awakening instincts that had lain dormant since that terrible day by the floodwaters. The same urgency, the same certainty that someone needed help. It all came rushing back. But this time, the fear came with it. Fear of failing again, of not being enough, of losing another soul she was meant to save. The kitten continued to stare, its tiny face somehow both innocent and knowing. Behind it, its siblings sat perfectly still, like small white sentinels. They were trying to tell her something. Of that, she was certain. Marla's ears picked up Martha's approaching footsteps, accompanied by the tap of her cane on the gravel path. "More of them today," Martha observed, her voice carrying a note of concern. George thinks we should call animal control." The thought sent a spike of panic through Marla's chest. No, these kittens weren't here by accident. They had come with a purpose, and something told her that treating them like ordinary strays would be a terrible mistake. She moved closer to the kittens, her nose working to catalog every scent they carried. Beneath the mud and damp, there were other smells: concrete, old wood, something metallic, and, most worryingly, fear. Not their own fear, but the fear of someone else, someone they'd been close to. The lid kitten took another step toward her, and Marla felt the old, familiar tug in her chest, the one that had guided her to so many people in need of rescue. Her past failure had broken something in her, yes, but it hadn't erased decades of training and instinct. These kittens were messengers, and they had chosen her. Thunder rolled again in the distance, heralding another approaching storm. The kittens remained unmoved, their eyes still fixed on Marla, waiting. In their steady gaze, she saw a chance, not just to help whatever or whoever had sent them, but perhaps to find her way back to the dog she used to be. The weight of her last failure pressed down on her like a physical burden. The memory of that day, the roar of the floodwaters, the desperate search, the moment she realized she'd been too late, had haunted her every day since. But as she looked at these determined little kittens, something else stirred in her heart. Hope, and with it, the first flickerings of courage. The smallest kitten mewed then, the first sound any of them had made. It was barely more than a whisper, but in it, Marla heard an echo of every cry for help she'd ever answered. And despite her fear, despite her doubts, she knew she couldn't turn away. By the third morning, the white kittens had established a pattern. They would appear as the sun rose, gathering near the barn, with their eerily coordinated movements and those penetrating stares. Each day, their numbers grew. 4, then 6, then 8, tiny white figures, all focused intently on Marla. Martha and George had grown used to their presence, though they still found it odd. "Like little ghosts," Martha would say, shaking her head as she scattered some dry cat food near the barn door. But the kittens never touched the food. They seemed interested only in Marla. On this particular morning, something felt different. The air was heavy with late summer humidity, and the kittens seemed more insistent than ever. Instead of their usual silent vigil, they paced back and forth, their small heads turning from Marla to the tree line and back again. The largest kitten, the one who always seemed to take the lead, stepped forward. It locked eyes with Marla and took several deliberate steps toward the woods before stopping to look back at her. The message was clear: follow us. Marla's heart began to race. Her training kicked in, years of search and rescue experience telling her that this was it, the moment these strange messengers had been waiting for. The fear was still there, that deep-seated dread of failing again, but something stronger was pushing her forward. She took a tentative step toward the kittens. They responded immediately, moving as one toward the tree line. Behind her, she heard Martha's screen door creak open. "Marla, where are you going, girl?" Martha's concerned voice carried across the yard. "George, Marla's heading for the woods." George's heavier footsteps followed. "Marla, come back here." But Marla couldn't turn back. Not now. The kittens were already disappearing into the shadows between the trees, and her instincts were screaming that someone needed her. She pushed forward, her powerful legs carrying her into the forest. The trail was challenging, even for her experienced paws. The kittens led her through thick underbrush, over fallen logs, and across small streams. They moved with surprising speed for such tiny creatures, but always kept just within sight, making sure she followed. The path they took wasn't random. These kittens knew exactly where they were going, turning at specific trees, avoiding certain areas, leading her deeper and deeper into the woods. The sounds of Martha and George calling her name faded into the distance. Marla's aging joints protested the journey, but she pressed on. The morning sun filtered through the canopy above, creating shifting patterns on the forest floor. The air grew thicker, heavy with the scent of decay and stagnant water. They must have traveled at least 2 miles when the kittens finally slowed their pace. Ahead, barely visible through the trees, stood a structure that made Marla's fur stand on end. It was a shack, or what remained of one. The wooden walls leaned at dangerous angles, the roof partially caved in on one side. Nature had begun to reclaim it. Vines crawled up the walls, and moss covered much of the remaining roof. The kittens gathered around the shack's perimeter, their white fur stark against the rotting wood and shadows. They watched Marla intently, waiting. The leader sat directly in front of what must have once been the door, now hanging from a single rusted hinge. Marla approached cautiously, her nose working overtime. The shack reeked of mold and rotting wood, but there were other scents too. Recent human presence, fear, and something else that made her hackles rise. Her training told her to be careful, to assess the situation before proceeding. She circled the structure once, noting the boarded-up windows and the way the foundation had settled unevenly into the ground. The kittens followed her movement with their heads, but didn't move from their positions. That's when she heard it. A sound so faint she might have missed it if she hadn't been listening so intently. From beneath the warped floorboards came a whimper, distinctly human, young, and frightened. The sound sent a jolt through Marla's entire body, awakening every rescue instinct she possessed. The cry came again, slightly louder this time. It was followed by a soft shuffling sound, like someone moving in a confined space. The kittens all turned their heads toward the sound, then back to Marla, their message now crystal clear. Marla's heart pounded against her ribs. Someone was trapped under there, in the darkness beneath this forgotten shack. Someone who needed help, just like that little boy in the flood. But this time was different. This time she wasn't too late. This time she could still make a difference. The kittens watched her, their blue eyes reflecting what little light filtered through the trees. They had brought her here for a reason. Now it was up to her to figure out what to do next. Marla's claws scraped against the weathered floorboards, her powerful legs working frantically to dig through years of accumulated dirt and debris. The whimpering sound grew clearer with each board she managed to loosen, driving her to work faster. Her muscles ached, but she couldn't stop, not when someone needed her. Her sharp barks echoed through the woods, a desperate call for help that she prayed someone would hear. The kittens watched from nearby, their tiny bodies tense with anticipation. Between her determined scratching and urgent barking, she almost missed the sound of approaching footsteps. "Hello? Is someone out here?" A man's voice called out, followed by the crunch of leaves under heavy boots. Marla barked louder, her tail wagging with relief as a tall figure emerged from the trees. He wore an orange hunting vest and carried a rifle slung over his shoulder. His eyes widened as he took in the scene. The dilapidated shack, the line of white kittens, and Marla's desperate attempts to break through the floor. "What in the world?" he muttered, stepping closer. Another whimper drifted up through the floorboards, and the hunter's expression changed instantly from confusion to alarm. "There's someone down there!" He rushed forward, setting his rifle aside and dropping to his knees next to Marla. His strong hands gripped the edge of the loose board she'd exposed, and with a grunt of effort, he pulled. The wood groaned, nails shrieking as they were torn free. Together, They made quick work of creating an opening, Marla digging and scratching while the hunter pried up board after board. The gap they created revealed a small space beneath the shack, dark and damp. The hunter pulled out his phone, switching on its flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating a sight that made Marla's heart clench. A young girl lay curled on her side, partially pinned by fallen debris. Her blonde hair was tangled and dirty, her clothes torn and muddy. Her gray eyes squinted against the sudden light. "Oh my God," the hunter breathed. He was already dialing 911 with shaking fingers. "I need help out at the old Wilson property," he spoke urgently into the phone. "There's a girl trapped under a shack. She's alive, but she needs medical attention right away." While he gave directions to emergency services, Marla inched closer to the opening. The girl, Callie, she would later learn, reached out a trembling hand. Marla gently licked her fingers, offering what comfort she could. The kittens, sensing it was finally safe, began making their way down through the opening, their tiny bodies easily slipping through the gaps. They moved to Callie, pressing close against her, purring loudly enough for Marla to hear. "They're my friends," Callie whispered, her voice hoarse. "They kept me warm, kept me company." She winced, trying to shift position. "My ankle. I think it's broken. I can't move it." The hunter ended his call and carefully lowered himself partway into the opening. "Help is on the way, sweetheart. Can you tell me your name?" "Callie," she answered, then coughed. "Callie Winters." "I'm Jim Patterson. We're going to get you out of here, Callie. Just hold on a little longer." The wait for emergency services felt endless, but Marla stayed right there, watching over Callie while Jim kept talking to her, keeping her alert and conscious. The kittens remained huddled around her, their white fur now streaked with dirt from the crawl space. Finally, the woods filled with the sounds of approaching vehicles and voices calling out. Paramedics arrived with equipment and backboards, followed by police officers and firefighters. The rescue operation moved quickly after that, carefully removing the debris pinning Callie, stabilizing her injured ankle, and lifting her out on a backboard. As they carried Callie to the waiting ambulance, the kittens followed like a small white honor guard. Marla watched it all, her body trembling with exhaustion, but her heart fuller than it had been in years. This time, she hadn't failed. This time, she'd helped save a life. Jim paused beside her, reaching down to scratch behind her ears. "Good dog," he said softly. "You did real good today." Marla's tail wagged weakly. She was too tired to move from her spot by the shack, but that was okay. Her job was done. She watched the ambulance pull away, its lights flashing, but sirens silent now. The kittens had disappeared into the woods again, their mission complete. Police officers moved around the scene, taking pictures and notes, their voices serious as they discussed what they'd found. But Marla paid them little attention. She lay down in the leaves, her muzzle on her paws, and felt something shift inside her, like an old wound finally beginning to heal. The steady beep of hospital monitors filled the small room as Callie Winters drifted back to consciousness. Her gray eyes fluttered open, taking in the sterile white walls and fluorescent lights above. An IV drip hung beside her bed, and her injured ankle was elevated and wrapped in pristine bandages. A kind-faced nurse noticed her stirring and approached the bedside. "Welcome back, sweetheart. How are you feeling?" Callie's throat felt raw, her voice barely a whisper. "Water. Please?" After helping Callie take small sips through a straw, the nurse pressed a call button. Within minutes, a doctor and 2 police detectives entered the room. The nurse adjusted Callie's bed so she could sit up slightly, supporting her with extra pillows. "Miss Winters," one of the detectives said gently, "I'm Detective Sarah Martinez, and this is my partner, Detective Roberts. We'd like to ask you a few questions about what happened to you, if you feel up to it." Callie's hands twisted in the thin hospital blanket. "The kittens," she said suddenly. "Are they okay? The white kittens that led the rescue dog to you?" Detective Martinez smiled. "They disappeared back into the woods, but they seemed fine." Tears welled up in Callie's eyes. "They saved my life. They were all I had down there, under the shack." "Can you tell us how you ended up there, Callie?" Detective Roberts asked, pulling out a small notebook. Callie's breathing quickened and the heart monitor's beeping increased. The doctor stepped forward, concerned, but Callie held up her hand. "I need to tell you. Please. I need someone to believe me." She took a shaky breath. "It was my stepfather, Wade Colton." The detectives exchanged glances. "Deputy Wade Colton?" Detective Martinez clarified, her voice careful. Callie nodded, tears now streaming down her pale cheeks. 3 weeks ago, I found something in our basement. Papers, photos, about my mom's disappearance. She didn't leave us like he said. The photos." She stopped, choking back a sob. "Take your time," Detective Martinez said softly. "When I confronted him, he changed. His eyes went cold. He grabbed me, drugged me with something. When I woke up, I was under the shack." Callie's voice trembled. "He kept me there, brought food and water sometimes. Said if I tried to escape, he'd make me disappear, just like Mom." The doctor moved closer, checking Callie's vital signs as she continued speaking. "There was a pregnant cat living under the shack when he first put me there. She had her kittens a few days later. They were the only thing that kept me going, kept me warm at night. Then one day, they started disappearing one by one. I thought they'd abandoned me, but they were looking for help." Detective Roberts cleared his throat. "Callie, these are very serious accusations. Deputy Colton is a respected member of law enforcement." "You don't believe me," Callie whispered, her face crumpling. "We believe you," Detective Martinez said firmly, shooting her partner a sharp look. "But we need evidence to make charges stick. Can you remember where you saw those papers and photos?" "In a metal box in the basement, behind the old water heater." Callie's hand shook as she wiped her tears. "But he'll have moved them. He'll have gotten rid of everything." As if on cue, the door opened, and Wade Colton himself stepped into the room, still in his deputy's uniform. Callie's heart monitor spiked dramatically, its beeping turning frantic. "I came as soon as I heard," Wade said, his voice thick with fake concern. "My God, Callie, we've been so worried." "Step back, Deputy Colton," Detective Martinez ordered, moving between him and the bed. "This is an active investigation." "Investigation?" Wade's face showed perfectly practiced confusion. "My stepdaughter was missing for weeks. Now she's been found, thank God. What's to investigate?" "Get him out," Callie whimpered, trying to shrink into her pillows. "Please, get him out." The doctor stepped forward. "Everyone needs to leave. My patient is in distress." Wade held up his hands in surrender, but his eyes met Callie's for just a moment. The message in them was clear. Who would believe her word against his? The detectives ushered Wade out, then turned back to Callie. "We'll post an officer outside your door," Detective Martinez assured her. "You're safe here." But as they left the room, Callie could hear Wade's voice in the hallway, explaining to someone how the trauma must have affected her mind, how worried he'd been, how grateful he was she'd been found. His voice broke at all the right moments, filled with seemingly genuine emotion. The nurse adjusted Callie's medication, and as darkness crept into the edges of her vision, she whispered a quiet thank you to her tiny white saviors. Without evidence, she knew her word meant nothing against Wade's. But at least she was free from that dark space beneath the shack, thanks to a group of determined kittens and a retired rescue dog who had answered their call for help. Marla couldn't shake the feeling that something was unfinished. The elderly couple who owned her had driven her home after the rescue, but her mind kept returning to the shack. That night, she paced restlessly by the door, whining until they finally let her out into the misty dawn. Her paws carried her swiftly through the familiar path in the woods, fallen leaves crackling beneath her feet. The old German shepherd's nose worked overtime, catching fragments of scents that didn't belong: motor oil, cologne, boot leather, human traces that shouldn't be this deep in the woods. The shack looked different in the early morning light, smaller somehow, more broken. Yellow police tape fluttered from its corners, but Marla ducked under it easily. Her nose led her to the side of the building, where the earth seemed recently disturbed. She began to dig, her worn paws moving with purpose. The soil here was softer than it should be, as if it had been turned over not long ago. Deeper and deeper she went, driven by an instinct she couldn't explain. The same instinct that had once guided her to find lost hikers and trapped children. Something glinted in the loose earth. Marla's paw struck metal, and she carefully nosed aside more dirt until the object came free. A heart-shaped silver locket, tarnished but intact, dangled from a broken chain. Even buried, it carried the faint trace of perfume. "Marla?" "Girl, what are you doing out here?" It was Tom, her elderly owner, who had followed her into the woods. He knelt beside her, joints creaking, and picked up the locket. His weathered hands trembled as he opened it. Inside was a small photo of a woman with Callie's blonde hair and gray eyes, holding a much younger Callie in her arms. On the back, an inscription read, "To Sarah, all my love forever." Within an hour, the quiet woods became a hive of activity. Police cars crunched down the dirt road, and crime scene technicians in white suits carefully gridded off the area around the shack. Detective Martinez stood watching as they worked, her dark eyes thoughtful. "The locket belongs to Sarah Winters," she confirmed to her partner. "Callie's mother, the one Wade Colton claimed had abandoned them 2 years ago." She looked down at Marla, who sat alertly nearby. "Seems this dog isn't done helping us solve this case." Word spread quickly through the small town. People who had once greeted Wade Colton with friendly waves now crossed the street to avoid him. At the diner, conversations hushed when he entered. His fellow deputies watched him with wary eyes. The investigation expanded. Detectives discovered that Sarah Winters had filed for divorce just days before her disappearance. Her car, supposedly driven to the bus station the night she left town, was found in a long-term parking garage 2 counties over, paid for with Wade's credit card. At the hospital, Callie's recovery was slow but steady. Her ankle was healing, and color had returned to her cheeks. The hospital staff had bent the rules to allow Marla to visit, recognizing the therapeutic effect the dog had on their young patient. "I knew you'd find it," Callie whispered to Marla during one visit, her fingers gently stroking the dog's graying muzzle. "Mom never took that locket off. When he told everyone she just left us, I knew it wasn't true. She would never have left without it. Without me." Marla rested her head on Callie's bed, her amber eyes fixed on the girl's face. The dog's presence seemed to give Callie strength, helping her push through the difficult questions from investigators and the painful physical therapy sessions. "The thing is," Callie continued, her voice stronger now, "he was so careful, so good at making everyone believe him. Even when I found those photos in the basement, he had an explanation ready. Said Mom had been planning to leave us for months, that she'd been stealing money, that she was unstable." She wiped away a tear. "But now they know. They finally know." The pressure on Wade Colton mounted. His carefully constructed facade began to crack. Fellow officers reported mood swings, angry outbursts. He started missing shifts, something he'd never done before. The investigation into Sarah's disappearance gained momentum, with search teams combing the woods around the shack. Detective Martinez visited Callie regularly, keeping her updated on the investigation. "We're closing in," she assured the girl. "Your mother's locket was just the beginning. We're finding more evidence every day." Marla lay at Callie's feet during these visits, a steady, protective presence. The dog that had once failed to save a child had found her redemption in saving another, and in helping to uncover a truth long buried. Her instincts, dulled by years of retirement and regret, had proven sharp as ever when it mattered most. The white kittens, now safely housed at the local shelter, had daily visitors. People came to see the tiny heroes who had led Marla to Callie, who had refused to abandon their friend in her darkest hour. Their story spread, touching hearts and reminding people that sometimes the smallest creatures could show the greatest courage. The autumn evening wrapped the small town in shadows as Wade Colton paced his living room, a half-empty whiskey glass trembling in his hand. News reports flashed across his television screen, each one hammering another nail into the coffin of his carefully constructed life. His phone buzzed constantly with messages from the department, requests for statements, demands for explanations. He switched off the TV and stared at his reflection in the dark screen. The respected deputy was gone, replaced by a haunted man with bloodshot eyes and 3 days of stubble. The discovery of Sarah's locket had changed everything. People who once greeted him warmly now hurried past with averted eyes. Even his own colleagues kept their distance, their suspicious glances following him through the station. Wade drained his glass and grabbed his keys. His hands shook as he climbed into his personal truck, not his patrol vehicle, which had been temporarily suspended pending the investigation. He drove through the quiet streets, past the hospital where Callie was recovering, past the station where his badge now sat in the chief's desk drawer. His destination was the veterinary clinic on the outskirts of town, where those damn white kittens were being kept. The clinic was dark and silent. Wade parked in the shadows behind the building, where security cameras couldn't reach. He pulled on black gloves and retrieved a small gas can from his truck bed. The back door's lock gave way easily to his police-issued pick set, one of the few tools he'd kept before being suspended. Inside, the clinic smelled of antiseptic and animal bedding. Cages lined the walls, most empty except for the recovery ward where 5 white kittens huddled together, their eyes gleaming in the darkness. They watched him silently, just as they had in the woods, their knowing stares making his skin crawl. "You little rats," Wade muttered, unscrewing the gas can. "You and that mangy shepherd ruined everything." Unknown to Wade, Marla had been following his truck since he left his house. Her aging legs had struggled to keep up, but decades of search and rescue work had taught her to track efficiently. Now she crouched in the shadows outside the clinic, watching through the windows as Wade began splashing gasoline across the floors and walls. The kittens started mewing urgently. Wade ignored them, continuing his grim work. When he struck the first match, Marla burst through the clinic's dog door, her powerful bark echoing through the building. Wade spun around, startled. The match fell from his fingers onto the gasoline-soaked floor. Flames erupted instantly, racing along the trail of fuel. Wade stumbled backward, cursing, and fled through the back door. Marla didn't hesitate. She raced to the recovery ward as smoke began filling the room. The kittens were crying now, pressing against the bars of their cage. The old dog reared up, her paws finding the simple latch mechanism. It took 3 tries with her arthritic joints, but the cage door finally swung open. The fire spread rapidly, feeding on the accelerant. Thick smoke made breathing difficult as Marla tried to herd the kittens toward the dog door. 2 of them followed immediately, but 3 remained scattered, frightened by the flames and confusion. Outside, Wade's truck peeled away into the night. The first flames became visible through the clinic windows, and a neighbor across the street noticed, immediately calling 911. But for Marla and the remaining kittens, help seemed very far away. The old shepherd's lungs burned as she searched through the thickening smoke. She found one kitten hiding under a desk and gently grabbed it by the scruff, carrying it to safety. Another had climbed up some shelving units to escape the flames. Marla barked encouragingly until it worked up the courage to jump into her waiting body. The smoke was overwhelming now, and the heat intense. Marla could barely see through her streaming eyes as she searched for the final kitten. Her legs trembled with exhaustion, and each breath was a struggle. But she refused to leave without the tiny creature. She would not fail. Another innocent life. Finally, she heard a faint mew from behind a fallen cabinet. The last kitten was trapped, unable to squeeze through the small space. Marla dug her claws into the linoleum floor and pushed against the heavy cabinet with all her remaining strength. The metal scraped across the floor, creating just enough space for the kitten to escape. Sirens wailed in the distance as Marla collapsed, her energy spent. The final kitten nuzzled her face, urging her to move. The dog struggled to her feet one last time, her legs shaking violently. Together, they made their way toward the dog door as flames consumed the building around them. The fire trucks arrived to find the clinic engulfed in flames. 4 white kittens huddled together on the front lawn, their fur smoky but otherwise unharmed. And beside them lay Marla, her gray muzzle black with soot, her chest heaving as she struggled to breathe. The 5th kitten stayed pressed against her side, refusing to leave its protector. As paramedics rushed to provide oxygen to the exhausted shepherd, police officers discovered Wade's abandoned gas can and a set of distinctive boot prints in the spilled fuel. The security camera from the gas station across the street had captured his truck's arrival and hasty departure. His desperate attempt to destroy evidence had instead provided investigators with exactly what they needed: proof of his capacity for violence and his willingness to kill to keep his secrets. Thick smoke filled Marla's lungs as she frantically searched for the scattered kittens. The flames danced across the walls of the veterinary clinic, creating an orange glow that cast menacing shadows. Her aging legs trembled with each step, but her search and rescue instincts had kicked in fully now. She wouldn't leave until every last kitten was safe. Through the dense smoke, she spotted the first 2 kittens huddled beneath an examination table. Barking softly to get their attention, she nudged them toward a broken panel near the floor, one she'd noticed earlier when checking the building's perimeter. The tiny white creatures squeezed through the opening, their fur already gray with soot. The heat grew more intense with each passing minute. Marla's eyes stung as she pressed forward, her nose close to the ground where the air was clearer. Her sensitive ears picked up a frightened mewing coming from behind a row of metal cabinets. The 3rd kitten had wedged itself into a corner, paralyzed with fear. Marla's joints protested as she shouldered the heavy cabinet, creating just enough space for her to reach the trembling creature. Grabbing it gently by the scruff of its neck, just as she'd seen mother cats do, she carried it to the broken panel and pushed it to safety. The 4th kitten had climbed to the top of a high shelf, trying to escape the smoke that now filled most of the room. Marla barked encouragingly, positioning herself beneath the shelf. The kitten hesitated, then jumped, landing safely on her broad back before scrambling toward the escape route. But the 5th kitten remained missing. Marla's breath came in ragged gasps as she searched, her chest burning with each inhalation. The flames had spread to the ceiling now, and pieces of burning material began falling around her. Through the crackling of the fire, she heard a faint cry from the storage room. The door was jammed, but Marla threw her full weight against it once, twice, 3 times, until it burst open. The last kitten lay trapped beneath a fallen shelf, crying weakly. With strength born of desperation, Marla dug her teeth into the metal frame and pulled, ignoring the searing pain in her aging muscles. The shelf moved just enough. The kitten crawled free, but Marla's legs finally gave out. She collapsed onto the floor, her vision growing dark around the edges. The tiny white kitten pressed against her face, mewing urgently, trying to get her to move. But Marla couldn't find the strength to stand. Outside, sirens wailed as 3 fire trucks screeched to a halt in front of the burning clinic. The 4 rescued kittens huddled together on the lawn, their eyes fixed on the building where Marla remained trapped. Firefighters rushed to deploy their equipment as flames shot through the roof. "There's a dog still inside," someone shouted, pointing to the broken panel where smoke now poured out. 2 firefighters immediately entered through the front door, their oxygen masks in place. They found Marla unconscious in the storage room, the 5th kitten still trying desperately to wake her. Working quickly, they lifted the German Shepherd and carried her to safety, the kitten following close behind. On the lawn, paramedics immediately began treating Marla with oxygen. Her fur was singed and her breathing was shallow, but her heart beat steadily. The 5th kitten refused to leave her side, curling up against her neck as she slowly regained consciousness. The attempted arson shocked the small town. Word spread quickly about how Wade Colt had been seen leaving the scene, and how Marla, already known for helping rescue Callie, had saved the kittens at nearly the cost of her own life. The security footage from the gas station across the street clearly showed Wade's truck arriving and speeding away just as the fire started. The town's opinion shifted dramatically. People who had once defended Wade now demanded action. The investigators, energized by the community's support and the new evidence, intensified their search. They expanded their investigation into Wade's properties and past activities, leaving no stone unturned. 3 days later, while Marla recovered at home with all 5 kittens as constant companions, the investigation made a breakthrough. A thorough search of county property records revealed a hunting cabin registered in Wade's late father's name. The remote property had been overlooked in initial searches because it wasn't listed under Wade's name. The old German Shepherd was still weak from smoke inhalation, but her tail wagged gently as she watched the kittens play around her bed. They had refused to leave her side since the fire, as if knowing their protector needed protecting now. Each time she closed her eyes, she could still feel the heat of the flames, still smell the acrid smoke. But there was no regret in her heart, only peace in knowing she hadn't failed this time. She had saved them all. Next door, Marla's elderly owners watched news coverage of the ongoing investigation. The camera showed police vehicles heading up a remote dirt road toward a cabin hidden deep in the woods. The community held its breath, wondering what secrets that isolated building might hold, and whether it would finally provide the evidence needed to bring Wade Colton to justice. The hunting cabin stood like a dark secret in a clearing, its weathered walls holding terrible truths. State police vehicles lined the narrow dirt road leading to it, their lights flashing against the early morning mist. Detective Sarah Martinez led the search team, her experienced eyes taking in every detail as they approached the property. The cabin's door creaked open to reveal a musty interior that seemed frozen in time. Dust covered most surfaces, but there were clear signs of recent activity. Fresh tire tracks outside, newly disturbed earth in the yard, and modern food wrappers in the trash. The investigators moved methodically through each room, photographing and documenting everything. In the main room, beneath a loose floorboard, they discovered a metal lockbox. Inside lay a driver's license belonging to Patricia Winters, Callie's mother. Next to it was a carefully organized collection of receipts and timestamped photos, creating false alibis for specific dates. Detective Martinez's hands trembled slightly as she lifted out a woman's silver wedding ring, still attached to a torn chain. "Call the forensics team," she ordered, her voice tight with controlled emotion, "and get me the chief on the phone. We've got what we need." The basement revealed even more horrors. A small room had been converted into a makeshift cell, with a heavy padlock on the outside and scratch marks on the inside of the door. The walls held calendar markings, careful counts of days that aligned perfectly with the timeline of Patricia's disappearance. Investigators found traces of blood on the concrete floor, along with strands of long blonde hair that matched Patricia's description. 20 miles away at the county courthouse, Wade Colton sat in his deputy's uniform, reviewing paperwork as if it were any other morning. He looked up as Chief Reynolds entered, flanked by 2 state troopers. The chief's face was granite hard as he approached his former friend and colleague. "Wade Colton," Chief Reynolds said formally, "you're under arrest for the kidnapping of Callie Winters, obstruction of justice, and suspected homicide in the disappearance of Patricia Winters." Wade's practiced calm cracked for just a moment, his eyes darting toward the exit before he forced a confused smile. "This is ridiculous, John. You know me. I've served this community for 15 years. "Save it for your lawyer, Wade," the chief replied, his voice heavy with disgust. "We found the cabin. We found everything." As the troopers led Wade away in handcuffs, courthouse employees watched in shocked silence. The man who had walked their halls for years, who had earned their trust and respect, was revealed as a monster hiding behind a badge. News of Wade's arrest spread through the town like wildfire. People gathered in small groups outside the local diner, sharing information and expressing their disbelief. Many recalled moments that now seemed suspicious in hindsight. Wade's insistence on handling certain cases personally, his careful management of his public image, the way he had always deflected questions about his stepdaughter's absence. At the veterinary clinic, Marla lay in a recovery kennel, her burns slowly healing under careful medical attention. All 5 white kittens had taken up residence there, refusing to leave their savior's side. The clinic staff had given up trying to keep them in their own cage. They simply found their way back to Marla, curling up against her less injured areas, purring softly, as if trying to heal her with their presence. Callie visited daily, sitting quietly beside Marla's kennel. The teenage girl's physical wounds were healing, but her eyes still held shadows of trauma. Yet when she watched Marla with her kittens, a small smile would touch her lips. These animals had saved her life, had brought her story to light, and had ultimately helped expose the truth about her stepfather. The local newspaper ran a front-page story about the case, featuring a photograph of Marla and the kittens. The article detailed how the animals' unusual behavior had led to Callie's rescue, and how Marla's discovery of the locket had helped break the case open. The community rallied around them, sending donations to cover Marla's medical expenses and bringing treats for the kittens. In the days following Wade's arrest, investigators continued to piece together the full extent of his crimes. The evidence from the cabin painted a picture of a calculated predator who had used his position of authority to hide his actions. The documentation they found suggested he had been planning Patricia's disappearance for months before acting, and had used his law enforcement connections to misdirect initial searches. The town that had once trusted Wade Colton now grappled with the reality of his betrayal. Messages of support poured in for Callie and the memory of her mother. The community, shaken but united, began the process of healing from the knowledge that evil had walked among them wearing a badge of trust. At the clinic, Marla dozed peacefully, surrounded by her tiny white guardians. Her burns would take time to heal completely, but her spirit was stronger than ever. She had faced the flames without hesitation, driven by the same instinct that had first drawn her to follow the kittens into the woods. This time, she had not failed. This time, she had helped bring justice to those who needed it most. The afternoon sun streamed through the hospital windows, casting warm patches of light across the sterile floors. Callie Winters sat in her wheelchair, the newly discovered locket resting in her palm. Her fingers traced the familiar engravings, memories of her mother flooding back with each touch. The nurses had helped her dress for this special visit, and though her body still ached, her spirit felt lighter than it had in weeks. Down the hallway, in the hospital's special care unit for animals, Marla lay on a thick blanket. Her burns were healing well, but patches of her fur remained singed and tender. When Callie's wheelchair appeared in the doorway, Marla's tail thumped weakly against the blanket, her amber eyes brightening at the sight of the girl. "Hey, girl," Callie whispered, wheeling closer. The 5 white kittens, now clean and well-fed, dozed nearby in a cozy bed. They had refused to leave Marla's side during her recovery, forming an adorable honor guard around their protector. Marla's elderly owners, Tom and Martha, stood quietly in the corner, watching with misty eyes as Callie reached out to gently stroke Marla's head. They had come to understand now why their usually calm dog had been so insistent about following those mysterious kittens into the woods. "I brought something for you," Callie said, her voice soft but steady. She held up the locket, its silver surface catching the light. "This belonged to my mom. You found it, and you found me." Her voice cracked slightly. "When nobody else was looking, when nobody else believed, you came for me. You didn't even know me, but you knew I needed help." With trembling fingers, Callie carefully fastened the locket around Marla's collar. The German Shepherd remained perfectly still, as if understanding the significance of the moment. The locket settled against her chest, a symbol of the lives she had helped piece back together. "The doctors say I can take the kittens home next week," Callie continued, glancing at the sleeping white balls of fur. "My Aunt Sarah's agreed to let me keep all of them. She says after everything they did to save me, they deserve to stay together." She smiled, the expression reaching her eyes for the first time in what felt like forever. "They'll be close by, so we can visit you often while you get better." Tom stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on Callie's shoulder. "Marla will always be here for you, sweetheart. What you two have been through together, well, that's something special." Martha wiped away a tear, adding, "We were so wrong to doubt her when she kept trying to follow those kittens. All those years as a search and rescue dog, she never lost her instincts. We're so proud of her." Callie leaned forward in her wheelchair, carefully wrapping her arms around Marla's neck. The dog nuzzled against her cheek, offering the same comfort she had provided in those first moments after the rescue. No words were needed between them. Their bond transcended language, forged in the darkness beneath that shack and strengthened by their shared journey toward healing. 3 weeks after the hospital visit, the late summer breeze carried the sweet scent of fresh-cut grass across the courthouse lawn. Callie sat in the witness stand, her voice steady despite the weight of the moment. The courtroom was hushed as she spoke about the days leading up to her mother's disappearance, about confronting Wade, and about the terrifying weeks spent beneath the shack. "The kittens were born 2 days after he put me there," she testified, her gray eyes fixed straight ahead. "They kept me going when I wanted to give up. They found ways to slip through the cracks in the floorboards, bringing back bits of food they could find. And then—" a small smile touched her lips. "Then they found Marla." District Attorney Sarah Bennett, who was also Callie's aunt and new guardian, carefully guided her through the testimony. The evidence from Wade's cabin lay spread across the prosecutor's table: photographs, documents, and the locket that had broken the case wide open. Wade sat stone-faced at the defense table, his deputy's uniform replaced by prison orange. After court adjourned for the day, Callie walked slowly through the town square, her aunt's arm wrapped protectively around her shoulders. People nodded respectfully as they passed. The whispers that followed were no longer doubtful, but supportive. The town had rallied around her, transforming from a place of secrets to a community of protection. At home, Sarah had converted her craft room into a bright bedroom for Callie. Photos of her mother lined one wall, happy memories preserved in frames. A large cat tree stood by the window, where all 5 white kittens could watch the birds and squirrels. Callie had named them Hope, Faith, Grace, Joy, and Spirit, words that carried her through the darkest times. "Mom would have loved them," Callie said one afternoon, sitting cross-legged on her bed while the kittens tumbled around her. Sarah paused in the doorway, hearing the change in her niece's voice. It was the first time Callie had spoken about her mother without that edge of raw pain. "She would have," Sarah agreed softly. "Just like she would be so proud of how brave you've been." Down the street, at Tom and Martha's house, Marla lay contentedly on their wide front porch. Her fur had mostly grown back, though a few patches remained slightly darker, battle scars from the clinic fire. The elderly couple had installed a special cushioned bed for her there, where she could watch the neighborhood while staying cool in the shade. Several times a week, Callie would visit with the kittens. They would spill out of Sarah's car like a wave of white fur, rushing to greet their canine guardian. Today was no different. Marla's tail wagged as the familiar vehicle pulled into the driveway. The kittens scattered across the yard, pouncing on butterflies and chasing leaves. Callie settled next to Marla on the porch, scratching behind her ears. "The judge says they'll announce the verdict next week," she told the dog quietly. "But Aunt Sarah says the evidence is really strong. He can't hurt anyone else now." Marla listened with half-closed eyes, radiating a peaceful contentment that had been missing during her years of retirement. The weight of her past failure, the child she couldn't save from the flood, no longer haunted her dreams. Instead, her nights were filled with the gentle purring of 5 tiny survivors and the knowledge that when it mattered most, her instincts had led her true. As the afternoon sun began to dip, casting long shadows across the yard, Marla watched her unusual family with satisfaction. The kittens had collapsed in a tired heap near her paws, their white fur glowing in the golden light. Callie leaned back against the porch railing, humming softly, a tune her mother used to sing. The locket still hung from Marla's collar, catching the sunlight and sending tiny sparkles dancing across the porch ceiling. In this moment, surrounded by the lives she had helped save, Marla felt complete. Her purpose, once lost, had been found in the most unexpected way. She closed her eyes, letting the peace wash over her, knowing that sometimes the greatest acts of heroism come not from grand gestures, but from simply following your heart when it calls you to help another soul in need. Thank you for watching. Stories like this remind us who we are. If something touched your heart, go ahead and subscribe. I'll be back tomorrow with another story that just might stay with you.